The fluorescent lights in the pediatric oncology waiting room never fully turn off. I know this because I spent 3 nights watching them hum above me, still wearing the same gray cardigan I'd grabbed off the hook by the front door when the ambulance called. There's a coffee stain on the left sleeve that I kept staring at, thinking, I need to wash that. As if that mattered. As if anything mattered except the 7-year-old boy on the other side of those double doors whose name was Eli, and who was mine, and who was fighting something inside his own body that no 7-year-old should ever have to fight. Eli had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 11 months earlier. 11 months of ports and protocols, of counting his white blood cells like they were precious coins, of learning a whole new language, neutropenia, remission, maintenance phase. His oncologist, Dr. Corder, Anand, had told us in February that Eli was responding well. Cautiously optimistic were his exact words. I had written them in the Notes app on my phone and read them back to myself on bad nights. That Tuesday in March, Eli's fever spiked to 104.1 at school pickup. I had him in the ER within 40 minutes. Standard protocol for oncology kids. Any fever over 100.4 is an emergency. The attending ran blood cultures and admitted him immediately. By midnight, they'd moved him to the PICU because his blood pressure was dropping. Dr. Anand came in personally. He used words like septic episode and we're being aggressive. I stood in the hallway outside Eli's room and called my mother-in-law. She let it ring 4 times before picking up. It's Nolan, I said. My husband had died 22 months earlier, a brain aneurysm, in the parking lot of a grocery store. A Tuesday afternoon just like this one. I still couldn't say his name without my throat doing something strange. It's about Eli. He's in the PICU. They think it's sepsis. There was a pause that lasted just a second too long. How serious? She asked. Serious enough that I'm calling you at midnight. Another pause. I'll talk to Robert in the morning. We'll see what we can do about coming up. She lived 40 minutes away. I hung up and stood there in the hallway with the phone against my chest and told myself I had misunderstood. She was tired. It was late. People say the wrong things when they're scared. By morning, she had not come. Neither had Robert, my father-in-law. My sister-in-law Brooke texted at 9, thinking of you guys, keep us posted. Which is the kind of text that means I am not going to come, but I want credit for acknowledging that something is happening. I did not have time to be angry yet. I was learning the rhythm of Eli's monitors, asking the nurses questions, watching his face for signs that the antibiotics were working. I ate half a granola bar from the family lounge and forgot to eat the other half. I called my own mother in Ohio, who cried immediately and asked if she should drive up. I said wait and see. I should have said come. On the second day, Eli stabilized. His fever broke around noon. Dr. Anand came in looking slightly less exhausted and said the cultures had identified the bacterial strain and they were targeting it directly. He's going to be okay, he said, and I sat down in the chair beside Eli's bed and cried for the first time since we'd arrived. Eli put his hand on my arm. 7 years old, bald from treatment, still had an IV in both hands, and he put his hand on my arm and said, Mom, don't cry, we got this. I wiped my face and told him he was right. We did. It was in the afternoon of that second day, while Eli was sleeping and I had finally gone out to the waiting room to eat an actual meal, a sandwich from the hospital cafe, turkey and Swiss, I remember because I couldn't taste it, that Robert and Nolan's mother walked in. I felt something release in my chest when I saw them. I thought, they came. They came after all. My mother-in-law walked straight past the chairs and said, we need to talk. Privately. I looked at Robert. He was not looking at me. We went to a family consultation room off the main hallway. It had a round table and a box of tissues and a painting of a lighthouse that I would come to hate. My mother-in-law sat down across from me and placed a manila envelope on the table. We've spoken to an attorney, she said. I waited. Nolan left a will. We've had it looked at by 2 independent lawyers now and both agree it's valid. It designates us as Eli's guardians in the event that you are deemed. She actually looked down at a piece of paper. Unable to provide a stable environment for a minor with complex medical needs. I heard the words. They didn't connect to anything for a moment. What are you talking about? You're a single mother working part-time, renting a house you can barely afford, managing a child with leukemia. Nolan understood the risk. He made provisions. Nolan never told me about any will. He didn't tell you a lot of things. Robert was still not looking at me. He was studying the lighthouse painting. I said very carefully, "That will is not real." My mother-in-law slid the envelope across the table. "Our attorney has already filed with the probate court. We're requesting emergency temporary guardianship given Eli's current medical status. The hearing is in 6 days." 6 days? Eli was still on IV antibiotics. His next chemotherapy cycle was scheduled for the following week. I looked at the woman across from me, the woman who had sat at my kitchen table for Thanksgiving 4 times, who had held my hand at Nolan's funeral, who I had called when Eli was first diagnosed because she was supposed to be family. And I did not recognize her. "You waited until he was in the ICU, I said. She didn't flinch. "We waited until we had everything in order." I left the room. I did not take the envelope. I walked back to the main waiting area and sat down in a chair by the window and looked at my hands for a long time. There was a woman sitting 2 seats down from me. She was reading something on a tablet, glasses pushed up on her forehead, a cup of tea going cold on the seat beside her. She was maybe 60, silver-haired, wearing a blazer that said she had come from somewhere important. I don't know why I started crying there instead of somewhere private. Maybe because I was too tired to find somewhere private. Maybe because I had been holding it together for 48 hours and something had finally broken through. The woman looked up. She didn't say anything immediately. She just set her tablet down. "How old?" she asked quietly. I looked at her. 7. She nodded slowly. Mine was 9. I didn't ask. She had used past tense and the way she said it told me everything. Her name was Dr. Harriet Voss. She was a retired family court judge who had served on the bench in the state for 21 years. She was at the hospital that afternoon because her goddaughter was recovering from an appendectomy on the 3rd floor. She had come down to the cafe for tea and wandered into the waiting room because the cafe chairs were uncomfortable. None of that seemed like coincidence to me later, though I know it was. I told her what had just happened. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, the way things do when you're still processing them. The envelope. The attorney. The hearing in 6 days. The will that Nolan had supposedly signed without ever mentioning to me in 3 years of marriage. Harriet listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took her glasses off her forehead and put them on and looked at me directly. "Was your husband the kind of man who made major legal decisions without discussing them with you?" "No," I said. "He consulted me about paint colors." "Was he estranged from his parents?" "Not estranged, but his mother had opinions about how we lived. He kept boundaries." "Did he have an existing attorney?" "We used someone together for our home buying." "I don't think he had one separately." She asked me a few more questions. Precise, calm, each one clearly going somewhere. Then she said, "Emergency temporary guardianship in cases like this requires the court to find that the child is in immediate danger in the current custodial arrangement. A hospitalization for a complication of existing treatment does not typically meet that standard, especially when the medical team considers the current parent's involvement appropriate. Do you have a good relationship with Eli's oncology team?" "Dr. Anand has known us for 11 months. "Good." She reached into her bag and wrote something on the back of a business card. "This is the name of an attorney. She practices family and probate law, and she's the best I've ever seen in a courtroom. Call her tonight. Don't wait until morning." I looked at the card, then I looked at her. "Why are you helping me?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," she said. "And because you remind me that someone should have." The attorney's name was Christine. She answered when I called at 7 p.m. that same evening, which I later learned was not something she did for everyone. But Harriet had apparently sent her a text in the 40 minutes between our conversation in the waiting room and my phone call, and Christine had been expecting me. She was sharp in a way that made me feel, for the first time in days, like there was solid ground somewhere. She asked for everything. Nolan's death certificate, our marriage certificate, our mortgage documents, Eli's medical records going back to diagnosis, my employment records, everything. "The will is the first problem," she said. "If they've had it notarized and witnessed properly, we can't dismiss it outright. But we can't dismiss it outright. A will that was never disclosed to a spouse, that names alternative guardians for a child without the other parent's knowledge, that's going to raise questions. It's not real," I said again. "Then we'll prove it." She paused. "Tell me about the relationship between your husband and his parents in the 2 years before he died." I told her. I told her about the argument at Christmas the year before Nolan died. when his mother had suggested we were making wrong decisions about Eli's preschool, about the way Nolan had started keeping more distance after that, about the fact that his parents had never been given a key to our house, which his mother had once commented on, about Nolan saying, one evening on the back porch, that he was worried his family saw Eli more as a legacy than a person. Christine was quiet on the other end. Then, okay, I have a direction. I slept in the recliner beside Eli's bed that night. He woke up once around 3 a.m. and asked for water, and I gave it to him, and he fell back asleep holding my hand. I stayed awake and watched his face and thought about Nolan, about how much he had loved this kid, about how he would feel knowing what his parents were doing in his name. He would be furious. I knew that without a single doubt. The next morning, Christine called me. She had reached out to the attorney Nolan and I had used for our home purchase, a man named, well, he's not relevant by name, but he had known Nolan, and he told Christine something significant. Nolan had contacted him 18 months before he died to ask about updating his estate documents. They had a preliminary conversation. Nolan had been clear that he wanted everything to go to me as primary guardian for Eli, and that his parents were explicitly not to be named. That meeting had never resulted in a finalized document because Nolan had died before following through, but the attorney had notes, dated notes from a client file. Christine said, quietly, they didn't know about that meeting. I sat with that for a moment. So the will they have was almost certainly drafted by someone else, at their direction, using Nolan's information. We're requesting a full forensic examination of the document. Signature analysis, notary verification, the works. The hearing was in 4 days now. Christine filed a response with the probate court the same afternoon, along with a motion to delay any temporary guardianship ruling pending the forensic review. Dr. Anand provided a letter, without me even asking, he offered, stating that Eli's mother had been the primary advocate for his care throughout 11 months of treatment, that she had demonstrated complete competence and dedication, and that disrupting his custodial arrangement during an active treatment protocol would be medically inadvisable. Harriet, it turned out, still had colleagues on the bench. She didn't intervene. She was careful to say she couldn't do that. But she made sure the right people knew that a retired judge had personally observed the situation and found the emergency guardianship claim highly irregular. Robert called me on the third day. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. He didn't say hello. He said, this was her idea, I want you to know that. I never wanted this. I let the silence sit. She found a lawyer last fall, he said. After Eli's diagnosis got worse for a while, she got scared and then she got, I don't know, convinced that she knew better. I tried to talk her out of it. I should have tried harder. Robert, is the will real? A long pause. No. The word landed like something physical. She had it prepared, he said. I don't know all the details. I didn't ask all the details and I should have. I signed something, some document. I thought it was. She told me it was a protective measure just in case. I didn't read it carefully enough. His voice broke a little. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't help. It helps more than you know, I said. But I need you to tell Christine everything you just told me. Everything. He did. The hearing happened anyway because the motion to delay was only partially granted. We got a 2-day extension but not a full postponement. Christine walked into that courtroom with the attorney's notes from Nolan's meeting, the results of the preliminary signature analysis showing inconsistencies, and Robert's sworn affidavit about the circumstances of the will's creation. My mother-in-law sat at the opposite table in a pale blue blazer and did not look at me once. The judge. Not Harriet, I want to be clear. Harriet had nothing to do with the courtroom itself. Read through the submitted materials for a long time. Long enough that the room was very quiet. Then she denied the emergency guardianship petition. She cited the medical team's letter, the absence of any credible finding of endangerment, and the questions surrounding the will's validity, which she referred to the probate court for full investigation. My mother-in-law's attorney asked to approach. The judge said no. Outside the courtroom, Christine put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Go back to your son." I did. Eli's last IV came out 2 days later. Dr. Anand cleared him to go home on the condition that I bring him in if his temperature rose above 100.4, which I would have done anyway. Eli walked out of the hospital wearing his Captain America hoodie and carrying the stuffed dog he'd named Pretzel in the 2nd grade. And when we got to the car, he said, "Can we get McDonald's?" I said yes. We got McDonald's. The probate investigation took 4 months. The forensic document examiner found that the signature on the will did not match samples of Nolan's handwriting and signature from other verified documents. The notary on the will, when interviewed, had difficulty recalling the specifics of the signing. My mother-in-law's attorney withdrew from representation in month 3, which Christine said was a very particular kind of signal. In month 4, my mother-in-law did something I had not expected. She showed up at my door alone, no Robert, no attorney. She stood on the front porch and I stood in the doorway and she looked at me and she said, "I was so afraid of losing him again. Nolan. Through Eli. I was afraid Eli would get worse and I would have no right to be there, and I made it about control, because I didn't know what to do with the fear. I didn't invite her in. But I didn't close the door. You could have called me," I said. "You could have said you were scared. I know. You almost cost Eli his stability during the hardest year of his life. For a document you knew wasn't real." She looked down. "I know. We did not hug. We did not become friends again that afternoon. But I told her that when Eli was ready, on his terms, at his pace, I would not stand in the way of her seeing him. Because Eli had lost enough. He did not need to lose grandparents too, if those grandparents could find a way to deserve him." She nodded and walked back to her car. I stood in the doorway for a while after she drove away. Eli called from the kitchen asking if we had any of the cinnamon crackers left. I went and found them in the back of the pantry and brought them to him and sat beside him at the kitchen table and watched him eat and thought about Nolan, the way I always do when something big happens. Thought about what he would say. I think he would say, "You did right." I think he would say, "I always knew you would." Eli is 8 now. His latest labs were good. His oncologist used the word excellent, which is a step above cautiously optimistic, and I will take that step every time. He has started asking questions about his dad, real questions, specific ones, the kind that mean he's old enough to want to know the person and not just the idea of him. I answer what I can. I tell him the true things, that Nolan was funny and careful, and the kind of person who consulted you about paint colors, that he loved Eli more than he knew how to say, so he showed it in other ways. That he would be so proud. Harriet and I still have coffee occasionally, about once every few months. She checks in on Eli's progress and I ask about her goddaughter, who is doing well. She never made a big thing of what she did that afternoon in the waiting room. She just helped. The way she said she wished someone had helped her. I think about that a lot. About the difference a single person can make when they choose to sit down next to someone instead of looking the other way. There's a version of this story where I didn't cry in that waiting room, where I went somewhere private, got myself together, made the calls myself without anyone seeing. And maybe in that version, I still would have found Christine eventually, still would have fought and won. Maybe, but maybe not in time. Maybe not with the same footing. I don't think I'll ever know. What I know is this. The morning Eli walked out of that hospital in his Captain America hoodie, eating French fries in the back seat, humming something to himself. He turned and looked out the window and said, "Mom, we're still a family, even if it's just us." I kept my eyes on the road and said, "Yeah, baby, we are. And we are. We really, truly are." I've thought a lot about what makes people do what my mother-in-law did. Not in an angry way anymore. Mostly just trying to understand it. The way you turn something over in your hands until it stops feeling so sharp. She was afraid. That's the truest explanation I found. She had already lost her son, and she was watching her grandson fight a disease that doesn't care how much you love someone. And somewhere in that fear, she made a choice that fear tends to make for people when they don't know how to sit with it. She reached for control. I'm not saying that excuses it. It doesn't. Fabricating a legal document, filing it with a court while Eli was still on IV antibiotics. There's no version of that I can call understandable in the way that lets her off the hook. But I've learned that holding on to the need to punish someone in my mind costs me more than it costs them. The court handled the consequences. That wasn't my job. What I keep coming back to is Harriet. She didn't know me. She had her own grief, her own reason to be at that hospital, her own life to get back to. She could have looked up from her tablet, registered that a stranger was crying 2 seats away, and made the reasonable decision that it wasn't her business. Most people would have. Most people do, not because they're cruel, but because the gap between noticing someone's pain and deciding to enter it is wider than it looks from the outside. She crossed it anyway. And that one choice, asking how old, listening without interrupting, writing a name on the back of a business card, that's the thing that changed the trajectory of what happened to Eli and me. Not a dramatic rescue. Just a person deciding, quietly, to show up. I think about the kind of person it takes to do that. Not someone who has everything figured out. Not someone who is immune to their own pain. Harriet had lost a child. She was carrying that every day, but she had built something inside herself. Some quality of attention toward other people. That meant her own grief didn't close her off. It opened her. That's not an accident. That's a choice made over a long time. In small moments. That becomes the kind of person you are. Eli is 8 now and doing well. When he asks me someday what I learned from the hardest year of our lives, I want to be able to tell him something true. What I learned is that integrity under pressure is not the same as being fearless. I was terrified through most of it. I shook in courthouse hallways. I cried in a hospital waiting room in front of a stranger. Being brave didn't mean not feeling any of that. It meant making the next right call anyway and then the one after that. And I learned that the kind of help that actually saves you usually doesn't announce itself. It sits down beside you and asks a quiet question. It answers the phone at 7 p.m. It writes a letter without being asked. It shows up in forms so ordinary you could miss them if you weren't paying attention. Pay attention, that's what I tell anyone, to the person sitting alone. To the fear that makes you reach for the wrong thing. To the small moments where you can choose to be the kind of person who crosses the gap. Because every single outcome in this story traces back to someone making that choice or refusing to. Eli looked up from his cereal last week and asked me if Dr. Anand was his friend. I said yes, I think so. He thought about that and said, yes, I think so. He thought about that and said, we have good people. I told him we really do. And we earned them by being the kind of people who deserved them.